It began with a silence that no one noticed. At 2:17 a.m., a single sensor on a deep space satellite flickered, registered a surge of radiation that shouldn't have existed, and then went dark. There was no explosion audible to human ears, no flash of light in the night sky to warn the billions of souls sleeping below. There was only the sun, exhaling a billion-ton cloud of magnetized plasma directly into our path. We had 12 hours. 12 hours before the invisible shield protecting our world would be pushed to its breaking point. 12 hours before the modern world, built on the fragile architecture of silicon and copper, would face its executioner. Most people spent those first few minutes in the quiet comfort of their routines, unaware that the countdown had already reached 10. By 4:00 a.m., the first tremors were felt, not in the earth but in the air. In the high latitudes, the aurora borealis didn't just appear, it bled across the sky in violent shades of crimson and deep violet, colors that didn't belong in a peaceful night. Pilots flying trans-polar routes were the first to feel the ghost in the machine. GPS coordinates began to drift, off by a few meters, then a dozen, then 100. In the cockpits, the calm blue glow of navigation screens flickered with a frantic, nervous energy. Static began to eat away at long-range radio frequencies, turning human voices into ghostly mechanical shrieks. The pilots looked out their windows at a sky that seemed to be vibrating, a celestial warning that the atmosphere was becoming a live wire. Ground control stations started receiving panicked reports, but the data was fragmented, breaking apart like dry sand in the wind. As the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, the scale of the anomaly became impossible to ignore for those whose job it was to watch the stars. At the Space Weather Prediction Center, the atmosphere was thick with a cold, paralyzing dread. The monitors weren't showing a standard solar flare. This was a coronal mass ejection of a magnitude not seen in centuries. They looked at the data, then at each other, realizing that the warning ignored labels on their theoretical disaster models were no longer academic. They had spent decades asking for better shielding, for grid redundancies, for a public that took the sun's temper seriously. Now, they were watching a monster move across the void at 2 million miles per hour, and all they could do was watch the clock. They tried to sound the alarm, but how do you tell a world addicted to connectivity that the very air is about to become its enemy? By 8:00 a.m., the digital world began to stutter. It started with slow loading times, a minor inconvenience that sparked a wave of irritation across social media. But then, the infrastructure began to buckle. Satellites, the silent sentinels of our age, were being baked alive. One by one, they entered safe mode, or simply spun out of control as their electronics fried under the bombardment of high-energy protons. Global communication networks, the invisible threads that hold our civilization together, were snapping. In the great financial hubs of London and New York, high-frequency trading algorithms began to fail, unable to find a stable signal. Millions of dollars vanished into the static. People stared at their phones, tapping glass screens that refused to update, waiting for a signal that was being drowned out by the roar of a star 93 million miles away. If you find yourself drawn to these moments where the veneer of civilization thins, where we look into the dark and realize how fragile our towers of glass truly are, then you belong with us. These stories of the edge, of the quiet before the storm, are why we gather at Critical Tomorrow. Because understanding the collapse is the only way to see what might actually survive it. What comes next in this countdown isn't just about failing wires. It's about what happens to us when the lights go out for good. By 11:01 a.m., the physical world began to react to the magnetic pressure. Power grids, designed to handle the steady flow of human demand, were now being forced to carry a surge they were never built to contain. In massive transformer stations across the northern hemisphere, the hum of electricity changed from a low drone to a rhythmic, guttural throb. The copper coils inside these giants began to vibrate, heating up to temperatures that turned oil to smoke. Technicians watched in horror as dials redlined. They tried to shed load, to cut power to entire cities to save the hardware, but the induction was coming from the atmosphere itself. The very ground was becoming a conductor. It was as if the Earth was being plugged into a socket it couldn't handle. The first major blackout hit at 12:30 p.m. It wasn't a flicker, it was a sudden, violent erasure. One moment, a metropolis was a buzzing hive of commerce and life. The next, it was a tomb of concrete and dead steel. Elevators groaned to a halt between floors, trapping thousands in the dark. Subways died in the tunnels. leaving commuters to navigate the subterranean gloom by the fading light of their phones. But the real fear wasn't the darkness. It was the silence. The constant background radiation of modern life. The hum of the fridge, the whir of the computer, the distant drone of traffic was gone. In its place was a heavy, expectant quiet that felt like a physical weight on the chest. As the final hour approached, the human impact moved from confusion to a primal, bone-deep realization. At gas stations, pumps sat useless, their electronic brains dead. At grocery stores, the digital registers were frozen, and as the realization set in that credit cards were now just useless pieces of plastic, the thin veil of social order began to fray. People looked at their neighbors not as friends, but as competitors for the last few bottles of water, the last few cans of food. There was no news. No emergency broadcasts reached the tablets or televisions. The only news was the sky, which had turned an eerie, sickly shade of green as the peak of the storm finally slammed into the magnetosphere. Imagine standing on your porch, looking up at a sky that seems to be on fire, holding a phone that is nothing more than a polished stone. You realize that every piece of information you ever valued, every contact, every memory stored in the cloud, is currently being erased by a wave of solar fire. You realize that you don't know the phone numbers of your loved ones by heart. You don't have a paper map. You don't even know how to find your way out of your own neighborhood without a digital voice guiding you. In that moment, the scale of our dependence becomes a terrifying clarity. We didn't just build a world of technology, we built a cage of it, and the sun just turned the key. The peak hit at 2:17 p.m., exactly 12 hours after that first satellite went dark. It was a silent hammer blow. Across the continents, the great transformers, the literal hearts of our civilization, finally gave up. They didn't just fail, they melted, their internal components fusing into useless lumps of metal. This wasn't a disaster that could be fixed in a week or a month. These machines took years to build, and the factories that made them were now dark too. The world hadn't just lost power, it had lost the ability to generate it. As the sun set on that final day, the cities didn't glow. For the first time in a century, the stars were visible over New York, Paris, and Tokyo, cold, distant, and indifferent to the species that had just been cast back into the medieval dark. We live in the blink of a cosmic eye, convinced that our glowing screens are a permanent feature of the universe. We ignore the warnings because the alternative is too heavy to carry, the knowledge that we are one solar tantrum away from total reset. Perhaps the true catastrophe isn't the storm itself, but the fact that we chose to forget how to live, without the hum of the machine. The sun will always rise, but there may come a morning where we find ourselves waking up to a world we no longer recognize, standing in the ruins of a digital empire that vanished in a single afternoon. If you want to keep looking behind the curtain, if you want to be ready for the day the signals stop, stay close. This is a journey through the shadows of what could be, and we are just getting started. Join us here at Critical tomorrow, because the future is coming, whether we're ready to see it or not. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and above all, don't ignore the silence.